Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the New Mexico Department of Justice. I've had the opportunity to stand behind this podium to announce a number of initiatives and investigations undertaken by our agency in an effort to serve and protect the people of New Mexico, to uphold our values, to do everything in our power to make sure that we have the resources available to our most vulnerable citizens to make sure that they thrive. But I am here today to speak about an issue that is frankly very, very personal for me. For those of you who are unaware, I began my career as a child abuse prosecutor. And oftentimes child abuse prosecutors get an insight into how the criminal justice system not only works, but also our child protective services and the Children, Youth, and Families Department operates. I have endeavored over the last several years to give the governor and her secretaries and her leadership team the time and space that I thought was necessary to bring about fundamental change inside of that agency. But today marks a stark turning point in terms of this office's engagement on this issue. And it is my sad duty to talk about what precipitated this change in approach. A little more than 10 days ago, 16-year-old Jaydun Garcia was discovered at AMI Kids, which is a congregate care facility in the city of Albuquerque. By all indications, Jaydun, like so many children in CYFD custody, had a turbulent life. He had experienced a great deal of trauma, and he was, like so many children in our state, looking for help from the adults and the government agencies that were charged with protecting him. And sadly, he took his own life in a facility that we know is not in the best interests of traumatized and abused and neglected children. And his death is, I think, for me, a turning point in terms of how we're going to address the failures at CYFD. His death is a tragedy, but it is also a moral failing. The state of New Mexico failed to protect this child. The state of New Mexico has failed to honor its legal and moral obligations under a variety of legal agreements that they have entered into. And simply put, enough is enough. I will not tolerate the excuses, the assurances. I think we have all grown tired of waking up and hearing about another child who's been injured, another child who's been hurt, another child in state custody who's been killed. And for that reason, the New Mexico Department of Justice will initiate a formal investigation into the facts and circumstances that led up to the death of Jaydun Garcia. But we will not stop there. We intend to conduct a comprehensive and wide-ranging investigation into various reports of children who have been referred to CYFD as victims of abuse and neglect, who have been placed in congregate care and in other facilities, who have been improperly housed at CYFD offices, who have been sexually assaulted in those offices, abused by armed guards in those offices, who deserve better and deserve more from this state and from the agencies charged with protecting them. This investigation will take several months. and we will use every available investigative tool and resource at our disposal. The ultimate objective is to prepare a comprehensive review and report for the incoming Office of the Child Advocate, so that the new Child Advocate has a blueprint of the issues that have plagued this agency and this state for decades now. And it is my hope that by shining a light on the problems inside of the agency and on the problems that New Mexico has in protecting its most vulnerable children, that we will begin the necessary process of fulfilling not only our legal obligation to our most vulnerable citizens, but fulfilling our moral obligation to do right by these kids. I am committed to deploying every resource that we have and getting the answers that we are entitled to so that we can move this state and this agency in a new direction. I am proud to be joined today by two individuals who have been committed to this fight and to this issue for a long time. First, Gary Halsapian, the Chief Executive Officer of Disability Rights New Mexico, and Marilyn Beck, the founder and executive director of New Mexico Child First Network. I'm going to invite Marilyn to step forward and offer a few comments. I think many of you know her from her advocacy in this space, her work in the Roundhouse, her relentless pursuit of justice on behalf of these kids, and somebody who is profoundly committed to making sure that we do better in terms of what we expect from an agency that is legally and morally obligated to do more and to make sure that these kids are protected. And so with that, Marilyn Beck.
Thank you. My name is Marilyn Beck. I am the founder and executive director of New Mexico Child First Network. We are a nonprofit dedicated to improving the lives of children in foster care and empowering those who serve them. I started this organization 7-8 years ago as a former foster parent. I'm here because as a former foster parent, I fostered 12 teenagers who are very similar to Jaydun. I want to read something from someone who knew Jaydun. Jaydun was a sweet, red-headed boy who loves basketball shorts and going to work and was completely and utterly failed by so many. He is also loved by many more than he knew, and it is days like this that being a part of this broken system seems impossible. My heart is shattered. It is important to note that this death was preventable, that the signs were there, and we should not be housing our children in warehouses of neglect like congregate care. We know this, the federal government has done some pretty significant investigations into its efficacy. What these children need to heal from their trauma is homes. Children need relationships to thrive and recover from their children. They need excellent parenting every single day through committed, developmentally informed relationships with adults. And it is worth saying that when everything else fails and the children we remove from the worst situations we can imagine are put into offices, congregate care, or facilities that have concrete beds to sleep in. These kids here, we don't have a home for you, and no one loves you. You are not important, and we have got to stop that. The dream is we have to recruit and retain quality foster families, and I appreciate the Department of Justice's, the Attorney General's advocacy and support of the Office of the Child Advocate. It is through transparency. It is through peeling back the layer of confidentiality to figure out what happened. But at the end of the day, there is a dead child that should have been prevented. One single call to Child Protective Services should have prevented this. And I just want to leave everyone with, there are still children in that facility. His roommate found his body. His child roommate, who's a minor, found that body, and he's still living in that facility. And we as New Mexicans have to do better. Thank you.
I want to just touch on one important aspect that Marilyn addressed, and that is the response that we have so far. As you probably know, members of the media, you have very little information about what happened to this boy. You have very little information about who was responsible in the days and weeks before his death. You have very little information about the decisions that were made and the resources that were dedicated to preventing this tragedy. How can we expect to improve that system if we don't know what happened, if we don't have answers, if we don't have transparency? And I want to recognize the efforts that were undertaken by the legislature during the last legislative session, specifically in the creation of the Office of the Child Advocate. It took a great deal of political fortitude on their part, given the governor's resistance to oversight of this agency. And they did make some progress with respect to the challenges that we currently have under New Mexico law on the confidentiality provisions of the Children's Code. From my perspective, much more needs to be done in terms of shining a light on what is happening inside that agency. Much more needs to be done to reveal what kind of resources are available, what kind of policies are in place, and ultimately who is responsible for making these decisions. We cannot continue to have an announcement of the death or injury or the assault of a child, and the immediate follow-up to that announcement is, we cannot tell you anything more. We cannot share anything more. How are we as a society, how are policymakers in Santa Fe supposed to deal with that? How are they supposed to address the situation? You cannot solve a problem that you're unwilling to acknowledge and unwilling to describe. And this cloak of secrecy has to stop. It absolutely has to stop. And so in addition to the investigation that will be conducted by this office, my commitment to the people of this state is that I will do everything I can to not only advocate for those changes in the legislature, but to take appropriate legal steps to shape the way in which members of the public and members of the media have access to critical information about what is actually happening inside that agency. Because without that, without shining a light on what is actually going on there, we simply cannot hope to move this state in a new direction and better protect our children. And so with that, I would stand for any questions that you may have.
Sorry. Do we know, so I saw in the press release, do we know how long he was, it says that he was at AMI for a period, but it also says he was at the office prior to that. Do we know the period of time that he spent in the office or in the congregate care facility?
No, at this point, we don't have that information, but that's precisely the kind of information that we'll be uncovering.
I know AMI kids are supposed to have access, I don't know if they have it virtual or carding to mental health resources. You sort of indicated that Jaydun may not have had that. Can you speak to that?
Again, we don't know yet what kind of behavioral health services he was provided. The delivery of those services, the frequency of that kind of support is going to be one of the aspects that we are going to be looking into. My larger concern is reflected in the guidance that Maryland referenced from both the federal government and also from experts on child welfare who uniformly reject the placement of children in congregate settings like this, particularly children who have previously experienced trauma, who have been the victims of abuse and neglect. Most experts in this space recognize that this is precisely the kind of environment that kids who have previously experienced trauma should not be placed in, because by grouping them together in that way without adequate resources, you increase the possibility of something like this occurring.
And how do you plan on going about getting information from the department?
So I won't comment specifically on all of our investigative tools, but I will say that every available tool that this agency utilizes will be undertaken in this instance.
Do you predict a fight?
I don't know yet if there's going to be resistance on the part of the department. My hope would be that we would focus on getting to the bottom of what happened, to getting to the truth, and not resisting the kind of oversight that I think everyone believes is necessary. I won't be deterred in any way by the resistance of other stakeholders in this situation, and so we are prepared to do what we have to do to get to the bottom of it. But my hope is that that can be avoided. I know that there was some rhetoric used recently, both in the signing of the bill that authorized the child advocate and in the decision to line item veto the funding for the establishment of that office. My hope is that that is not indicative of the administration's position moving forward. But if it's a fight that needs to be had, we're prepared to do that.
I think one of the criticisms we've heard from the department and the executive in general over HB 5 and the Office of Child Advocates, which I think you just mentioned, was that there may be a conflict of interest because your office does represent the state or state agencies in certain cases. Do you anticipate that there being a conflict of interest in this investigation? How would you respond to that criticism?
Well, first, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of my role as an independently elected executive officer in a government that is defined by divided executive authority. I have the ability to both prosecute and defend on behalf of the state. I also have authority to protect the constitutional rights and the welfare and interests of the citizens of this state. And I will not use this office to defend unconscionable legal practices or unconstitutional practices, or in any way support an agency that's failing to meet its legal or constitutional obligations. That's simply not something that will be done. And another way to think about this is the Office of the Attorney General is something that has its own independent judgment to render in cases. I'm not a regular lawyer that does the bidding of any particular client. I've been elected by the people of this state to serve and protect them, and that starts with the people who don't have access to resources. And I think one of the most troubling things that has come out of the let's say the political aftermath of the passage of those bills and the funding for that office is that there seems to be a misplaced focus on the adults at CYFD, on the impact of the grown-ups who work there, and very little discussion about what is in the best interests of children. And look, right now, there's another Jaydun Garcia somewhere in this state. There's another one. Somewhere in this state, there's a kid who is desperate for help, who's been hurt, who's been abused, who's been placed inside this system, and who's to speak out for him? Who's to step up and protect him? How does he advocate for behavioral health services? How does he advocate for a safe and loving home? How does he advocate for a caseworker that has the resources and tools that they need? That's my job. And I'm prepared to defend that position with anyone who seeks to have a different interpretation of my role. But my job is to protect vulnerable people, and that's what I intend to do.
We've got time for one more question.
What would be your solution? I mean, we hear all these stories of parents who are abusing their kids, and people start commenting, well, why doesn't CYFD take the kids? But then we hear situations happening like this at CYFD. So, I mean, Is there really a solution that you can point out?
Well, the solution starts with being honest about what's actually happening inside these agencies. One of the concerns I have is what's happening right now with the other kids in that house. What's happening with Jaydun's siblings? I'd like to know right now. There are other siblings in this family that are in the custody of the state. I would like to know where they are and how they're being protected and what steps have been taken. And when you go and ask those questions, which I hope you do, you already know what answer you're going to get. We can't tell you. We can't say anything. And what assurance is that in a system that repeatedly leads to the death of children and the abuse of children? These are kids that are coming from broken homes and neglect and abuse, and they go into a system that leads to more neglect and abuse. And it's unacceptable. It's simply unacceptable to have and I want to make another really important point. I do not want to hear excuses from the leaders of this agency and this administration. This administration has inherited billions of dollars in surplus every single year. Every single year. Is it being deployed on behalf of those kids? Is it being spent in a way that supports and helps them? We should know. We have a right to know. And right now we don't. Right now we don't. My role is to uncover the truth. My role is to get to the bottom of the facts and circumstances of this case and similar cases, and leave it to the policy experts and others who have worked in this space to provide meaningful guidance on what needs to happen next. But you will not have a solution as long as this lives in darkness, which is what is happening right now.
All right, we'll do one more back here.
Yeah.
We got 2 minutes, so we'll do one more.
Mr. Torrez, you speak about lack of transparency, and I'm curious who's being non-transparent. Is it CYFD? Is it APD? State? Who handled this case? I guess I've never even heard of it.
So the little information that we have right now, we have as a result of, frankly, of public reporting by the media. One of the things that has been reported by various outlets is that the department's response is, we can't give you any information other than confirming the fact that a death occurred. And so reporters and journalists have done a good job of trying to piece together Jaydun's story by doing background interviews, by talking to other kids, by talking to family members. But I think most people expect their government to just be forthright about what happened. And you raised a really important example, right? Think about what we have done with police accountability in this country. Think about how much that has changed in the last 30 or 40 years. We have officers that wear body-worn cameras. We have reports that are subject to IPRA. Every aspect of an encounter with an agent of the state who is armed with a badge and a gun is recorded and reported and available to the public so that we have a sense of accountability. I know the transition from the way law enforcement used to be conducted to what it is now has been a difficult one. It's been a cultural shift, but I think fundamentally it is a necessary step in terms of giving the public confidence and frankly giving officers some measure of protection against false accusations. I am not advocating for that level of transparency in this space because there are certain privacy interests that children should have, especially abused and neglected kids. We do not want to mark them for life because they were abused or neglected as children or sent to foster care. But there's a way to protect their privacy interests without shielding the misconduct that takes place elsewhere inside the agency and within the other actors inside this space. the fact that we don't have basic information from the government, this child was in state custody. And right now, you don't have basic facts and information. And I'm prepared to test the law in this space, and I'm prepared to advocate fundamentally for a change in the law if that is what's required. But this idea that we are going to shield every aspect of information from public disclosure behind this blanket shield on child confidentiality, it's facilitating and making possible a continuation of a system that is broken and failing kids. I want to thank you for being here, and I appreciate your attention to this. I will ask for one more request, if you'll permit me, and it's for the people who will be watching this story, people who are frustrated about CYFD, people who want to do something and don't know what to do. Please, if you are able, sign up to be a foster parent for kids. As hard as it is, and as challenging as it is to navigate that process, if you are compelled to try and do something on a personal level, signing up to be a foster family and a foster parent for one of these kids is the most important thing that you can do as an individual. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to encourage people to think about doing that if they're able. So thank you very much.